Rebecca Keller's life was a well-oiled machine. As the CEO of a booming tech empire, she had designed her existence like one of her finely tuned algorithms. Every minute planned, every risk calculated. Her mansion, perched high above San Francisco, was a fortress of sleek technology and security. Cameras lined every hallway, sensors controlled every door, and no one came or went without Rebecca knowing. It wasn't paranoia, it was efficiency. In her world, trust was a luxury she couldn't afford, which was why hiring a new nanny for her twin daughters, Lily and Emma, felt like a gamble she didn't have time to lose. The twins were only 5, but they were already showing signs of brilliance, much like Rebecca at their age. They needed someone special, someone who could nurture them without being intimidated by Rebecca's demanding routines. After weeks of interviews, she had almost given up hope, until Evelyn Caldwell walked into her office. Evelyn was a woman of few words. She seemed out of place in the high-tech environment of Rebecca's home. Her simple clothes and calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the modern luxury around her. But there was something about her, a quiet competence that Rebecca couldn't quite put her finger on. She had experience, a calm presence, and most importantly, a way with children. Rebecca needed help, and Evelyn appeared to be the right person for the job. The first few days went smoothly, almost too smoothly. Evelyn adapted quickly to the mansion's rigorous schedules. Every morning, she arrived precisely at 7 a.m., her soft knock at the door always on time. She followed Rebecca's detailed instructions without question, seamlessly integrating into the household routine. The twins adored her almost immediately. Lily, the more reserved of the two, often sat quietly in Evelyn's lap, listening as she read aloud in a soothing tone. Emma, on the other hand, tested her boundaries, but Evelyn never raised her voice or lost her patience. Instead, she had a way of gently guiding Emma back in line, as if she had known the girl for years. Rebecca found herself watching Evelyn more than expected. Her movements were so fluid, so deliberate. Every step she took seemed to have a purpose. But it wasn't just her efficiency that caught Rebecca's attention. There was something else, something she couldn't quite name. At first, it was small things. The way Evelyn seemed to know when the twins needed comfort without them asking, or how she could calm them during one of their rare tantrums without saying a word. But soon, other details started to emerge. One evening, while Rebecca was working late in her home office, she noticed Evelyn outside in the garden with the girls. The twins were playing a game, something Rebecca couldn't quite make out from the distance. Evelyn stood nearby, not exactly participating, but guiding them with subtle gestures. For a moment, Rebecca swore she saw Evelyn glance toward the security camera mounted near the garden gate, as if she knew exactly where it was and what it was recording. That night, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Evelyn was competent, too competent perhaps. She never made mistakes, never asked unnecessary questions, and never seemed flustered by the demands of the job. Most nannies, by this point, would have struggled with the mansion's technological complexity or the constant surveillance. But not Evelyn. She moved through the house like she had always belonged there. Rebecca's unease grew when she found the twins giggling together in their room. Something clutched between them. It was a small, worn book, one she had never seen before. When she asked where it came from, Emma blurted out, "Evelyn gave it to us." The next morning, Rebecca confronted Evelyn about the book. "I didn't realize you were bringing outside materials into the house," Rebecca said, trying to keep her tone neutral. Evelyn smiled, a calm, almost too comfortable smile. "It's just a children's story, something I thought the girls would enjoy. It teaches them patience." Rebecca's eyes narrowed. She wasn't sure what bothered her more, the fact that Evelyn had brought something into the house without permission or the unnerving calm with which she explained herself. There was something beneath the surface, something about Evelyn's presence that Rebecca couldn't ignore. But she pushed the thoughts aside. There was no time for distractions. Her tech company was preparing for one of its biggest launches yet, and her time away from the office was already pushing the limits. The girls were happy, safe, and for the first time in months, Rebecca had some relief from the constant juggling of work and motherhood. Still, as she left for another business trip, she couldn't help but glance back at Evelyn, who stood at the door with the twins. Her expression was as serene as always, but Rebecca could feel a small crack forming in the perfect surface of her well-controlled life. Something about Evelyn, about the way she fit so seamlessly into their home, made Rebecca's stomach tighten with a tension she couldn't explain. As she pulled away from the driveway, she couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, she had made a mistake. And that was when the first seed of doubt began to take root. This is just the beginning, a calm before the storm. The transition to the next chapter will begin to unravel the deeper layers of Evelyn's presence, keeping the tension subtle but palpable, building towards something that neither Rebecca nor the audience can yet see coming. The hum of engines and the buzz of business faded as Rebecca's car sped down the highway, leaving her estate in the distance. She adjusted the Bluetooth in her ear, her mind already shifting gears to her next meeting. But no matter how hard she tried to focus, one image kept nagging at her. Evelyn standing by the door, her calm, ever-placid face watching as Rebecca drove away. Rebecca shook her head, frustrated with herself. "You're overthinking it," she told herself. Evelyn was just a nanny, and the twins adored her. Still, the way she integrated so effortlessly into their routine made Rebecca feel uneasy, as if her own home was no longer entirely hers. There was something too smooth, too perfect about the woman. Back at the mansion, Evelyn moved like a ghost through the halls. Rebecca's high-tech security system tracked her every move, but Evelyn didn't seem to mind. Unlike other nannies who nervously avoided the cameras or hesitated before entering rooms, Evelyn carried herself with an air of confidence that suggested she was used to being watched. It was almost as though she knew the cameras were there before she even arrived. In the pristine kitchen, the twins sat at the marble counter, their small hands busy with crayons and papers. Evelyn prepared their afternoon snack, cutting fruit into perfect slices, humming a soft melody under her breath. She was always calm, almost serene, as if nothing could disturb her. "Evelyn, can we go outside after snack?" Lily asked, her voice full of quiet excitement. Evelyn smiled, her gray eyes twinkling as she looked at the girls. "Of course. Finish your snack, and we'll go play in the garden." As the girls giggled in anticipation, Evelyn's eyes flickered briefly to the corner of the ceiling where one of the security cameras blinked. For the briefest second, her face seemed to harden, but then she turned her attention back to the girls, her soft smile returning as quickly as it had vanished. Out in the garden, Evelyn led the twins to a secluded spot near the rose bushes, a place just out of the camera's range. The security system, flawless as it was, had blind spots, areas Rebecca had never worried about because of the property's vastness and overall surveillance coverage. It was in these blind spots that Evelyn seemed most at ease. She crouched down beside the girls, her voice barely audible as she whispered something to them. The twins' eyes widened with curiosity, nodding eagerly. They began a strange game, quiet, deliberate movements as if mimicking something Evelyn had shown them. From a distance, it looked like nothing more than children playing. But had Rebecca been there, watching closely, she might have seen something else, something far more deliberate. Hours later, as dusk began to settle over the mansion, Rebecca's car pulled into the driveway. She had returned earlier than expected, cutting her trip short after feeling an unusual pull to come home. Her instincts, the same ones that had helped her build an empire, rarely failed her. And tonight, something felt off. She entered the house silently, the familiar beeps of the security system welcoming her back. The mansion was quiet, too quiet. Normally, at this hour, she would hear the twins playing or the faint sound of their giggles echoing through the halls. But now, there was only silence. Rebecca headed straight for the living room, her heels clicking against the marble floors. As she passed by the large windows, she caught a glimpse of the garden and froze. There, in the fading light, she saw Evelyn and the twins huddled together, their heads close as if sharing a secret. The sight was so unusual, so out of place, that Rebecca found herself standing completely still, watching. Evelyn's back was turned to her, but the twins were facing Rebecca's direction. Their expressions were odd. Their usually bright, animated faces looked focused, almost intense. It wasn't the carefree play she was used to seeing. Without thinking, Rebecca moved quickly toward the garden door, her heart pounding harder with each step. She wasn't sure what she was about to walk into, but her gut told her she needed to be there, now. As she stepped outside, Evelyn looked up, as if sensing her presence before she even spoke. The twins jumped to their feet, running toward Rebecca with smiles that seemed a little too forced. "Mommy, you're back," Emma squealed, throwing her arms around Rebecca's waist. Lily clung to her other side, beaming up at her mother. But something in their eyes, something Rebecca couldn't quite place, left her feeling unsettled. "I decided to come home early," Rebecca said, her gaze shifting toward Evelyn, who rose slowly from her crouched position. Evelyn's face was as unreadable as ever. "The girls have had a wonderful day. We've been playing in the garden and reading stories." Rebecca nodded, trying to shake the unease creeping up her spine. "It's getting late. Let's go inside." She herded the twins toward the house, her hand resting protectively on their shoulders. As they passed through the door, she cast one last glance back at Evelyn, who lingered by the garden gate, her figure barely visible in the growing darkness. That night, after the twins were tucked in, Rebecca sat in her office, reviewing footage from the day. The mansion's security system had captured almost every minute of their activities, except for those few hours in the garden. The blind spot. Rebecca leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she fast-forwarded through the footage. There was something about the way Evelyn operated, the way she moved the girls into that part of the garden. It felt intentional. She was cautious, but not in a way that indicated fear. It was more calculated. Tapping her fingers nervously on the desk, Rebecca pulled up the garden's blueprints, looking for ways to adjust the cameras to eliminate that blind spot. But her thoughts kept drifting back to Evelyn's face, calm, smooth, and somehow knowing. The feeling gnawed at her, like a splinter just beneath her skin. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. A text message from the twins' school popped up, confirming their upcoming parent-teacher conference. Rebecca sighed, her attention momentarily pulled away from Evelyn. She closed her laptop, convinced she was overanalyzing. After all, there was nothing inherently wrong with Evelyn. She was a nanny, doing her job. Yet, as she made her way to bed, Rebecca couldn't shake the feeling that she had missed something important today. Something that lingered in the shadows of her perfect life, just out of sight. And for the first time in years, Rebecca Keller, a woman who controlled every detail of her life, felt like something, or someone, was slipping through the cracks. The next morning, Rebecca woke with a start. The vague unease from the previous night clung to her, lingering in her chest like a weight she couldn't shake off. She replayed the scene in the garden, the odd expressions on her daughter's faces, Evelyn's unreadable calm. It was too strange to ignore. But with her company's product launch just days away, she had little time to dwell on it. Or so she told herself. As she dressed for the day, the usual hum of efficiency returned. There was no room for doubt. She was Rebecca Keller, after all, CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire. Everything in her life was controlled, predictable. Evelyn was just a nanny, and the girls were just playing an innocent game. Still, the moment gnawed at her as she finished buttoning her blouse and caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her reflection looked tired, a faint tension tightening around her eyes. "Get a grip, Rebecca," she whispered to herself. By the time she stepped into the kitchen, the house was already alive with its usual quiet order. The twins sat at the breakfast table, giggling over their cereal, while Evelyn moved smoothly between the stove and the counter, setting out plates of sliced fruit. "Good morning, Mommy," Lily chirped, her eyes bright. Emma echoed her sister, smiling up at Rebecca with a look that was just a little too perfect. It felt rehearsed. "Morning, girls," Rebecca replied, kissing them both on the tops of their heads. "Did you sleep well?" The twins nodded in unison, exchanging a quick, almost secretive glance with each other. Rebecca's gaze shifted toward Evelyn, who was calmly pouring juice into glasses as if the world couldn't touch her. "I hope the girls didn't stay up too late," Rebecca said, her tone casual but probing. "I had a long day yesterday." "They were perfect," Evelyn replied, her voice as smooth as ever. "We read a few stories and they went straight to bed." Rebecca nodded, but something in Evelyn's voice felt overly practiced, too polished, like everything she said was designed to ease suspicion. Rebecca's instincts flared up again, but she pushed them aside for the moment. She had a meeting to prepare for, and her schedule didn't allow for distractions. "I'll be home early today," Rebecca said, trying to keep her tone light. "I thought we could all have dinner together." "That sounds wonderful," Evelyn answered, smiling in that gentle, familiar way. The girls beamed at the idea of their mother being home early. As Rebecca left the house, she found herself lingering by the door, looking back at the scene she had just left. Evelyn and the twins looked like the perfect, serene picture of domesticity. But beneath that surface, Rebecca could sense something shifting. The cracks in her perfect life were there, just small enough to overlook, but impossible to ignore. Back at the mansion, Evelyn continued her day as usual, following the same meticulous routine Rebecca had set up months ago. The girls finished their breakfast and ran off to their playroom, their laughter echoing faintly through the house. It was the kind of life anyone would envy. A beautiful home, 2 sweet daughters, and a loving nanny to take care of it all. But Evelyn's gaze was sharp as she tidied the kitchen. She wiped down the counters with a precision that suggested she wasn't just cleaning. She was thinking, planning. When she finished, she moved quietly to the playroom where the girls were waiting. They were already immersed in their toys, but as soon as Evelyn entered, they dropped everything and turned to her with expectant eyes. "Can we play the game again?" Emma asked, her voice full of excitement. "Please, Evelyn." "The secret game?" Lily chimed in, bouncing on her feet. Evelyn smiled, the same calm, reassuring smile she always wore. But this time there was something almost calculating behind it. She nodded and knelt down to their level, her voice soft as she spoke. "All right, but remember, you must keep this game a secret. No one else can know, especially your mommy. It's our special game." The twins nodded eagerly, their trust in Evelyn absolute. They loved the attention she gave them, the way she made them feel like they were part of something special, something just for them. This secret game had quickly become their favorite, and they were too young to question why it needed to be kept hidden. Evelyn began to lead them through the steps of the game, her instructions subtle but precise. It wasn't like any other game they played. It was quieter, more deliberate. The girls followed her every move, mimicking her gestures and responding to her whispered commands with giggles and smiles. To them, it was just another form of play, but to Evelyn, it was something far more intricate. That afternoon, as the sun poured through the mansion's large windows, Rebecca returned home earlier than usual, just as she had promised. She walked into the quiet house, immediately noticing the absence of noise. Usually, the twins would be running through the halls, their laughter echoing throughout the space. But today, the house felt oddly still. "Girls," she called out, her voice carrying through the halls. There was no answer. Rebecca's pulse quickened. She walked quickly toward the playroom, her heels clicking sharply against the floor. As she approached, she heard faint whispers coming from behind the door. She paused, listening. The voices were soft, almost conspiratorial, as if the twins were sharing some secret. She pushed the door open gently and saw them. The girls were huddled together with Evelyn, their faces lit up with excitement. But as soon as they saw Rebecca, they froze. Emma's hands dropped to her sides, and Lily's expression shifted into something that looked almost guilty. "What are you girls doing?" Rebecca asked, trying to keep her tone light. "Nothing, Mommy," Emma said quickly, her voice a little too high-pitched. "We were just playing." Rebecca's eyes flickered to Evelyn, who was already standing, smoothing down her skirt with practiced ease. There was no hint of guilt on her face, just the same calm smile that never seemed to waver. "The girls were just telling me about their day," Evelyn said smoothly. "They've been so well behaved." Rebecca forced a smile, but her mind was already racing. The way the girls had looked at each other when she entered, the way they had fallen silent so abruptly, it was too strange. Something was happening, something Rebecca didn't understand. "Well," Rebecca said, her voice tight, "I'm glad to hear they're behaving, but maybe it's time for a break. Why don't you two come help me with dinner?" The twins hesitated for a moment, glancing at Evelyn as if seeking her approval. Rebecca noticed the exchange and felt a small flicker of anger. She was their mother. Why were they looking to Evelyn first? "Go on," Evelyn said, her tone soft and encouraging. "It's time to spend some time with your mommy." Reluctantly, the The girls stood and followed Rebecca out of the playroom. As they walked down the hall, Rebecca could feel their distance, a gap between them that hadn't been there before. She glanced back over her shoulder and saw Evelyn watching them, her face unreadable. That night, as the girls played in their room after dinner, Rebecca sat alone in the living room, her laptop open but her mind elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away from her. The twins had always been so close to her, but now it was as if they were hiding something, pulling away. And Evelyn seemed to be at the center of it all. She had hired the nanny to help her, to make her life easier. But now, Rebecca couldn't help but wonder if she had let something, or someone, into her home that she couldn't control. And for the first time, the fortress she had built around her life felt fragile. Days turned into weeks, and Rebecca's suspicion about Evelyn only grew. Despite the lack of any concrete evidence, something felt undeniably wrong. The twins had become increasingly secretive, and Rebecca couldn't help but notice the subtle changes in their behavior. They spoke less about their days, their laughter seemed less spontaneous, and there was a distance between them that Rebecca couldn't bridge. Her frustration built as she watched Evelyn navigate the household with a grace and ease that seemed almost unnatural. She was perfect, too perfect, never a misstep, never a complaint. It was as if she were one step ahead, anticipating Rebecca's every need and concern before she even voiced them. To an outsider, Evelyn was the ideal nanny, but to Rebecca, she was becoming an enigma she couldn't ignore. It was during a rare quiet morning in the office when Rebecca made a decision. She was supposed to fly to New York for a meeting with investors, but something made her hesitate. The thought of leaving the girls alone with Evelyn, without fully understanding what was going on, was unbearable. So, she changed her flight plans, deciding she would return home earlier than expected. That evening, Rebecca arrived back at the mansion, her heart pounding in anticipation. The house was dark except for a few lights in the hallway and living room. She took a deep breath and entered quietly, not wanting to alert anyone to her presence just yet. As she moved through the familiar rooms, she felt a strange sensation, like she was an intruder in her own home. The house felt different without her. The silence was heavy, almost oppressive. Rebecca paused by the staircase, listening for any sound, any hint of what she might find. Voices drifted down from the twins' bedroom, faint but unmistakable. Rebecca took the stairs slowly, her ears straining to catch the conversation. As she neared the top, she heard Evelyn's calm, soothing tone, followed by the twins' quiet, eager responses. Curiosity and unease pushed her forward. She stopped just outside the partially open door, peering in through the small gap. What she saw made her blood run cold. Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed, her back to the door. Lily and Emma were curled up beside her, their small hands clutching something tightly. Rebecca squinted, trying to see. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box, one she didn't recognize. "Remember," Evelyn was saying softly, her voice almost hypnotic. "This is our secret. No one else can know, especially your mommy. This is just between us." The twins nodded, their faces serious. Rebecca's heart clenched. What was Evelyn doing with them? What was in that box? She forced herself to stay still, watching, waiting. "Can we see it again?" Emma asked, her voice filled with awe. Evelyn glanced over her shoulder, and for a terrifying moment, Rebecca thought she had been caught. But Evelyn's gaze didn't reach the door. She simply nodded, opening the box with a deliberate, almost ritualistic motion. The girls leaned in, their eyes wide as Evelyn lifted something from inside. A delicate, shimmering pendant. It caught the light, casting tiny reflections across the room. Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. She had never seen that pendant before, and yet there was something familiar about it, something that tugged at the edges of her memory. "What does it do?" Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. Evelyn's smile was serene, almost otherworldly. "It helps you remember. It's a very special charm, one that's been in my family for a long time. But you have to be very careful with it. It's not something you play with. It's something you keep safe." Rebecca's mind raced. What is she talking about? Remember what? She wanted to burst into the room, demand answers, but something stopped her. She needed to know more, needed to understand exactly what Evelyn was doing. She forced herself to stay still, her hand gripping the doorframe so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The girls stared at the pendant, their faces a mixture of fascination and reverence. Rebecca could see it now. The way they looked at Evelyn, not just with affection, but with a kind of devotion. It was as if she had cast a spell over them, drawing them into a world where Rebecca had no place. Evelyn gently placed the pendant back into the box and closed it, her movements slow and deliberate. "You're both doing so well. I'm very proud of you," she said, her voice warm. "Now, it's time for bed. Remember what I said. This stays between us." The twins nodded solemnly, and Evelyn rose from the bed, placing the box on a high shelf. Rebecca barely managed to step back in time as Evelyn turned toward the door. She pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering in her chest as Evelyn walked past her, her footsteps soft on the carpet. Rebecca waited, her breath caught in her throat, until she heard Evelyn's steps fade down the stairs. Then she slipped into the room, her hands trembling. The girls were already under the covers, their eyes closed. But Rebecca knew they weren't asleep. "Mommy?" Lily's voice was hesitant, her eyes fluttering open. Rebecca forced a smile, her heart aching with confusion and fear. "Hey, sweetheart. I just got home and wanted to check on you." Emma sat up, her face lighting up with a smile that felt more like a mask. "Did you have a good trip?" Rebecca nodded, sitting on the edge of the bed, where Evelyn had been moments before. "Yes, it was fine. But I missed you too so much." They hugged her tightly, and for a moment, the world felt right again. But the sight of that box, the strange pendant, and the way they had looked at Evelyn still lingered in her mind like a dark shadow. "Girls," she said softly, her voice trembling despite her best efforts, "what were you talking about just now, before I came in?" Lily's eyes darted toward the shelf where the box sat, but she quickly looked away. "Nothing, Mommy. Just stories." "Yeah," Emma added quickly. "Evelyn was just telling us stories." Rebecca's heart sank. They were lying to her. Her own daughters, lying right to her face. She kissed them both, hiding the tears that threatened to spill over. "All right, get some sleep," she whispered, her voice barely holding steady. "I love you both so much." "Love you too, Mommy," they chorused, their voices soft and sweet, and for a moment, it almost felt real. She stayed with them until their breathing evened out, then slipped quietly out of the room. She stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door, feeling more lost than she ever had in her life. Downstairs, Evelyn moved with her usual calm, tidying up the kitchen, setting everything in perfect order. There was no sign of tension, no hint that she knew Rebecca had been watching. But as she finished, she glanced at the camera mounted above the refrigerator, her eyes lingering for just a moment longer than usual. Then she turned away, her expression unreadable, and disappeared into the shadows of the house. Rebecca sat in her office, staring at the security feed. She rewound the footage, her eyes glued to the screen as she watched Evelyn's every move. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing she could pinpoint as wrong. And yet, her instinct screamed at her that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. She leaned back, rubbing her eyes, exhaustion pulling at her. She had to figure out what was going on, but she was starting to realize that whatever this was, it went deeper than she could have imagined. And for the first time, she felt truly afraid. Rebecca's sense of unease followed her like a shadow. Days passed, each one heavier than the last, as she tried to keep up with the demands of work and family. But her thoughts kept drifting back to that night. The pendant, the secret box, the strange way the twins had looked at her. Every time she glanced at Evelyn, that serene smile and those calm, knowing eyes, she felt her control slipping just a little more. She knew she needed answers. But every attempt to talk to the twins about what had happened was met with silence or carefully crafted half-truths. Rebecca felt as if her own daughters were slipping away, drawn into a world she couldn't see or touch. And at the center of it all was Evelyn. It wasn't until a rare moment of quiet in the office, long after the girls were asleep, that Rebecca made her decision. She needed to know more about Evelyn. There was no trace of her before the application to work as a nanny. No social media, No previous employment records, just a name and a background check that turned up nothing unusual. It was as if Evelyn had stepped out of nowhere, straight into their lives. So Rebecca did what she did best. She started digging. The next morning, Rebecca called a meeting with her head of security, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Marcus. She rarely interacted with him directly, preferring to leave the details of security to her team, but this was different. "Marcus, I need you to look into something for me," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. Marcus raised an eyebrow but nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Keller. What do you need?" Rebecca hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "It's about Evelyn Caldwell, the nanny. I need to know everything you can find on her. Where she's been, who she's connected to, anything and everything." There was a brief flicker of surprise in Marcus's eyes, but he didn't question her. "I'll get right on it. But I have to ask, is there something specific you're concerned about?" Rebecca bit her lip, glancing around the room as if expecting Evelyn to materialize out of the shadows. "I just have a feeling. Something's not right. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but—" Marcus nodded again, his expression serious. "I understand. I'll be discreet." As he left the room, Rebecca felt a flicker of relief, but it was quickly swallowed by the same gnawing anxiety that had become her constant companion. She didn't have time to wait. She needed answers now. That afternoon, Rebecca found herself at her father's old study, a place she rarely visited. It was dusty, the shelves lined with books no one had touched in years. The room smelled of leather and memories, a reminder of a past she'd buried long ago. She moved to the far corner, where a small wooden box sat on a shelf, covered in a thin layer of dust. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the weight of old secrets heavy in her chest. Inside the box were keepsakes from her childhood, a photo of her parents, a bracelet, and a few letters yellowed with age. And there, nestled at the bottom, was a pendant. It was nearly identical to the one she had seen Evelyn show the twins. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't seen this in years, hadn't even thought about it. Her mother had given it to her, a long time ago, saying it was part of their family's heritage, but she had never known what it was for. She turned it over in her hands, a strange chill running down her spine. What was Evelyn doing with something so similar? And what did it have to do with her family? Rebecca sat down heavily in the old leather chair, her mind racing. Her mother had been secretive, always hiding things, always saying Rebecca would understand when she was older. But then her mother had died suddenly, leaving Rebecca with more questions than answers. She stared at the pendant, memories swirling in her mind like dark clouds. There had been whispers, long ago, about her mother's involvement in something mysterious, something dangerous. But Rebecca had dismissed them as gossip, the ramblings of people who didn't understand her family's success. Now, though, with Evelyn in the picture, those whispers felt like a warning she should have heeded. Rebecca placed the pendant back in the box, her hands shaking. She had to know the truth. She couldn't confront Evelyn directly, not yet, but she needed to find out where she had come from and why she was here. That night, after the twins were asleep, Rebecca locked herself in her office, her laptop open in front of her. She hesitated, then typed in a name she hadn't thought about in years. Michael Donovan. He was a private investigator she had used once, long ago, for something she wanted to forget. But now, she needed his skills more than ever. His voice, gruff and familiar, answered after the third ring. "Rebecca Keller. Didn't think I'd hear from you again." "I need your help, Michael," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "I need you to find out everything you can about someone, Evelyn Caldwell." There was a pause, and she could almost hear his mind working on the other end of the line. "What's this about?" "I don't know yet," she admitted, hating the uncertainty in her voice. "But it's important. It's about my family. I need to know who she is, where she came from, and what she's doing here." Michael sighed. "All right, I'll look into it. But if this is anything like last time—" "It's not," she interrupted, a hint of desperation creeping into her tone. "This is different. Please, just find out what you can." After she hung up, Rebecca leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. She felt like she was unraveling, piece by piece, but she couldn't stop now. Not until she knew the truth. The following day was a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Rebecca's mind was elsewhere. Every time she looked at Evelyn, every time she saw the twins with her, the fear tightened around her like a vice. She felt like she was watching a play, each scene meticulously crafted to keep her guessing, to keep her doubting her own instincts. That evening, as she sat in her office once again, her phone buzzed. It was Michael. "I've found something," he said without preamble. "It's not much, but it's strange. Evelyn Caldwell doesn't exist. At least, not before 3 years ago. There are no records, no history, nothing. It's like she just appeared out of nowhere." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. "That's impossible. There has to be something." "There is one thing," Michael continued, his voice cautious. "She was listed as a caretaker for an elderly woman in a small town upstate. The woman died a year ago. Heart attack, according to the report. But I dug a little deeper, and it turns out the woman had connections to your family." Rebecca's mind reeled. "What do you mean?" "I'm still piecing it together, but there's more. Your mother used to visit that town. A lot. I'm trying to find out why, but it looks like Evelyn might have some connection to your mother." Rebecca's throat tightened. "What kind of connection?" "I don't know yet, but it's something. I'll keep digging." After the call ended, Rebecca sat in stunned silence. A connection to her mother? To her family? It made no sense, but at the same time, it explained so much. The pendant, the secrets, Evelyn's eerie calm. It was all tied together, somehow. She stood up abruptly, pacing the room. She couldn't wait for answers to come to her. She had to confront Evelyn, had to know what she was hiding, why she was here. But she needed to be careful. Evelyn wasn't just a nanny. She was something more, something dangerous. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca made her way down the hall to the nanny's quarters. The house was quiet, the only sound her own footsteps echoing softly. She hesitated outside Evelyn's door, her hand raised to knock, but then she froze. Through the small gap in the door, she saw Evelyn. She was sitting at a small table, her head bowed over something. As Rebecca watched, Evelyn lifted her hand, holding the same pendant Rebecca had found in her father's study. It glimmered softly in the dim light, and Evelyn's expression was one of intense concentration, as if she were drawing strength from it. Rebecca's heart raced. She wanted to burst in, demand answers, but something held her back. She watched, barely breathing, as Evelyn placed the pendant back in its box and closed it gently. Then, as if sensing Rebecca's presence, she turned and looked directly at the door. Rebecca stumbled back, her heart pounding wildly. She fled down the hall, her mind spinning with questions, with fear. Evelyn wasn't just anyone. She was tied to Rebecca's past, to her family's secrets, and she was here for a reason. Rebecca knew, deep down, that whatever Evelyn wanted, it was something she couldn't afford to lose. Not her family, not her daughters, and not the truth that lay buried beneath years of lies and silence. But she also knew that confronting Evelyn head-on would be dangerous. She needed to be smart, needed to plan her next move carefully, because now it wasn't just about suspicion. It was about survival. And in the shadows of her own home, Rebecca Keller felt more alone than she had ever been in her life. Enjoying the video? Subscribe to our channel to receive more interesting content. Click the subscribe button and stay updated with the latest news. The days following her discovery were a blur of tension and anxiety for Rebecca. Her every interaction with Evelyn was laced with suspicion, her smiles forced, her words carefully measured. But Evelyn, with her impenetrable calm, seemed completely unfazed, almost as if she were waiting for Rebecca to make her move. Michael's investigations continued, yielding only fragmented pieces of information, each one more confusing than the last. Evelyn's past was a patchwork of vague references and dead ends. There were whispers of her presence in places tied to Rebecca's mother, an old house in the countryside, a secluded cottage by the lake, but no concrete proof of who she was or why she had entered Rebecca's life. One evening, after the twins had been put to bed, Rebecca found herself alone in the dimly lit living room. The silence of the house felt oppressive, her mind replaying every strange encounter, every unsettling glance. She knew she needed to confront Evelyn, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if this was all just her paranoia twisting the truth? But the pendant, the box, the secrets, there were too many coincidences. And if Evelyn really was connected to her mother, then there was no telling what she might want. Rebecca stood, her resolve hardening. She needed to talk to someone who might know more, someone who had known her mother before everything had fallen apart. There was only one person who came to mind, someone she hadn't spoken to in years, her mother's oldest friend, Helen. The next day, Rebecca drove out to the countryside, where Helen lived in a modest, sprawling house surrounded by trees and wildflowers. The sight of the place brought back a flood of memories. Summer afternoons spent playing in the garden, her mother's laughter echoing through the open windows. But now, everything felt different. Rebecca's past had always been shrouded in a haze of unanswered questions, and Helen might be the key to unlocking them. Helen greeted her at the door, her eyes widening in surprise. "Rebecca, my dear, it's been so long. Come in, come in." They sat in the cozy living room, the scent of freshly brewed tea filling the air. Rebecca felt a pang of guilt for not visiting more often, but she pushed it aside. There were more pressing matters at hand. "Helen," Rebecca began, her voice strained, "I need to ask you about my mother. There are things I never understood, things she never told me. I need to know the truth." Helen's eyes softened with sympathy. "Oh, Rebecca, your mother was a complicated woman. She had her secrets, things she thought were best left hidden. But she loved you, more than anything." "I know," Rebecca said, her voice tight, "but there's something happening, something that has to do with her past. There's this woman, Evelyn. She's connected to my mother somehow, but I don't know how or why." Helen's face paled. "Evelyn? Are you sure?" "Yes," Rebecca said, leaning forward. "Do you know her?" Helen hesitated, her gaze drifting to the window, as if searching for something in the distance. "Your mother and I, we were part of something we never talked about openly. It was a group, a circle of sorts, dedicated to protecting certain legacies, certain abilities. Your mother had a gift, one she didn't like to speak of. Evelyn was part of that world, a guardian of sorts." Rebecca's mind raced. "A guardian? Of what?" "Of you," Helen said quietly, "and your family's heritage. Your mother tried to shield you from it, but Evelyn was always meant to watch over you. After your mother's death, we thought Evelyn had disappeared. But if she's with you now..." Rebecca's heart pounded. "She's been watching my daughters, Helen. She's been doing things, teaching them things, and I don't know what's going on." Helen's eyes filled with alarm. "You need to be careful, Rebecca. Evelyn's loyalty was always to your mother and to you. But if she's involving the girls, what should I do?" Rebecca whispered, fear tightening her throat. "You need to confront her, but carefully. She won't hurt you, but she has her own way of seeing things. She believes she's protecting your family's legacy, but you have to make her see that you're the one in control now." Rebecca nodded, her mind a whirlwind of confusion and determination. "Thank you, Helen. I think I needed to hear that." As she drove back to the city, Rebecca's thoughts were a chaotic swirl of fear and resolve. Her mother's secrets, Evelyn's presence, her own daughters caught in the middle. It was too much to take in. But one thing was clear. She needed to confront Evelyn, to get the truth once and for all. That night, Rebecca returned home to find Evelyn sitting in the living room, reading quietly. The sight of her, so calm, so at ease in Rebecca's home, filled her with a surge of anger. She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and stepped into the room. "Evelyn, we need to talk," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. Evelyn looked up, her expression neutral. "Of course, Rebecca. What's on your mind?" Rebecca clenched her fists, trying to keep her voice level. "I know you're connected to my mother. I know you've been watching over us. But I need to know why. Why are you really here?" Evelyn's eyes softened, a hint of sadness flickering across her face. "Your mother and I were very close. She asked me to look after you, to protect you and your family. When she died, I thought my work was done. But then I heard about you, about your daughters, and I knew I had to be here." "Protect us from what?" Rebecca demanded, her voice rising. "What are you teaching my girls?" "Patience," Evelyn said softly. "Focus. Things they'll need if they're going to understand who they are. Rebecca's heart raced. What are you talking about? Your family has a legacy, Rebecca, a gift that's passed down through generations. Your mother wanted to shield you from it, but she knew that one day it would resurface. The twins, they have that gift. They need to be prepared. Rebecca shook her head, anger and confusion warring within her. You had no right. They're just children. You don't get to decide what they learn, what they know. I'm not deciding, Evelyn said calmly. I'm guiding them, so they won't be afraid, so they'll be ready. Ready for what? Rebecca's voice was barely more than a whisper. For the truth, Evelyn said, her eyes meeting Rebecca's with a steady gaze. For the responsibility that comes with who they are. You may not believe it, but I'm trying to help. Rebecca felt a surge of anger, her hands trembling with the force of it. You need to leave. Now, I won't let you near my daughters again. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Rebecca hadn't seen before. If that's what you want, I'll go. But you need to understand, Rebecca. You can't run from this. The girls will need someone to guide them, someone who understands what they're going through. If not me, then you. Rebecca stood her ground, her heart pounding. I'll find a way, but you're not welcome here anymore. Evelyn nodded slowly, as if accepting a verdict she had expected all along. Very well. I'll leave tonight. But please, remember what I said. The girl's gift, it's a part of them. You can't ignore it forever. Rebecca watched as Evelyn turned and walked away, her movements unhurried, her posture still as calm and graceful as ever. It was as if she were simply stepping out for an evening stroll, not leaving behind everything she had been a part of for the past year. As the door closed behind her, Rebecca felt a rush of emotions: relief, fear, anger, and something else she couldn't quite name. She had taken the first step in reclaiming her life, but she knew it wasn't over. Evelyn's presence lingered in the house, in the very air she breathed. Upstairs, she checked on the twins, watching them sleep peacefully, their faces innocent and untroubled. She wanted to believe it was over, that she had done the right thing. But Evelyn's words echoed in her mind. You can't run from this. Rebecca knew she would have to face whatever lay ahead, not just for herself, but for her daughters. She had uncovered the secrets of her past, but now she had to confront them, to protect her family from a legacy she never asked for. And as she stood there, watching over her sleeping children, she felt a steely resolve settle within her. She would face whatever came next. She would protect her daughters, no matter the cost. But deep down, she knew that the battle was just beginning. The house felt different after Evelyn left, quieter, but not in the peaceful way Rebecca had hoped for. There was an unsettling emptiness, a void where Evelyn's calm presence had been. The twins, initially confused by her sudden departure, asked for her constantly. Rebecca gave them vague, soothing answers, but she could see their confusion slowly turning into something else. Anxiety, perhaps, or distrust. It was as if they sensed that something had shifted, that their world was no longer as safe and predictable as it once seemed. Rebecca tried to keep their routine as normal as possible, but the tension was palpable. She worked from home more often, not wanting to leave them alone with another stranger, even if it was just a temporary babysitter. But every time she looked at them, she saw the question in their eyes. Where is Evelyn? Mommy, when is Evelyn coming back? Emma asked one afternoon, her small voice breaking Rebecca's heart. She's not coming back, sweetie, Rebecca said gently, kneeling down to look her daughter in the eyes. But you're safe. I'm here, and I won't let anything happen to you. Lily frowned, her expression far too serious for a 6-year-old. But Evelyn said she was teaching us. She said it was important. Rebecca forced a smile, even though every word felt like a lie. You don't need Evelyn to teach you. I'll teach you everything you need to know. The girls exchanged a glance, a look that was becoming all too familiar, a silent communication that shut Rebecca out. She wanted to scream, to demand they tell her what Evelyn had been teaching them, but she knew it would only push them further away. I love you both so much, she said, pulling them into a tight hug, hoping they could feel the desperation in her heart, even if they couldn't understand it. As the days passed, Rebecca's determination grew. She needed to understand what Evelyn had been preparing the girls for, what legacy or gift she had been talking about. The answers weren't going to come from the twins. They were too young, too confused. And Evelyn was gone, leaving behind only more questions. Her only option was to go back to where it all began, to her mother's old home, the place she had avoided for so long. She had inherited it years ago, after her mother's sudden death, but she had never found the courage to go through her mother's belongings. The house was filled with too many memories, too many ghosts of a life she had tried to forget. But now, she had no choice. The drive to her mother's house was long and somber, the countryside rolling past in a blur of green and gold. Rebecca's thoughts were a tangled mess of fear and determination. She had been running from her past for so long, burying it beneath layers of success and control. But now, it was time to face it. The house stood at the end of a winding driveway, half hidden by tall trees and overgrown bushes. It looked almost exactly as she remembered. An old Victorian with a wraparound porch, its white paint peeling, the windows dark and empty. A shiver ran down her spine as she stepped out of the car, the quiet stillness of the place pressing in around her. Rebecca hesitated at the front door, her hand hovering over the doorknob. She had the keys, but it felt wrong to just walk in, as if she were trespassing in her own past. Taking a deep breath, she turned the key and pushed the door open. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the faint scent of lavender, her mother's favorite. The furniture was covered with white sheets, ghostly shapes that filled the darkened rooms. Rebecca flicked on a light, the old chandelier overhead sputtering to life, casting a dim glow over the entryway. Her heart pounded as she moved through the house, each step stirring up old memories. The living room, where her mother used to sit and read. The kitchen, still cluttered with old pots and pans. The study, its walls lined with shelves of books and papers. Everything was exactly as it had been, frozen in time. Rebecca made her way to the study, her hands trembling as she opened the door. This was where her mother had spent most of her time, poring over old books, writing in her journals. Rebecca had never understood what she was so obsessed with, what secrets she was trying to uncover. The desk was cluttered with papers, yellowed with age. Rebecca sat down, picking up a stack of notebooks, her mother's neat handwriting filling the pages. She flipped through them, her eyes scanning words and phrases that made little sense. References to ancient texts, mentions of rituals, symbols she didn't recognize. One notebook caught her attention. It was older, the pages brittle and worn. She opened it carefully, her breath catching as she saw her mother's name scrawled at the top, followed by a date, 30 years ago. The entries were detailed, almost frantic, her mother's handwriting growing messier as the pages went on. The gift has always been passed down through the women of our family, but it's changing. I can feel it. I have to protect Rebecca, keep her safe. Evelyn understands. She'll help, but I'm afraid. Rebecca's heart raced as she read. Her mother had been afraid. Of what? Of Evelyn? Of the gift? She flipped to the next page, her hands shaking. There's something dark in our legacy, something I've tried to ignore. But it's there, in the shadows, waiting. I thought I could shield Rebecca from it, but she's stronger than I was. She'll need Evelyn's help. I just hope it's enough. The words blurred as tears filled Rebecca's eyes. Her mother had been trying to protect her, but from what? What was this dark legacy she had mentioned? And why had Evelyn returned now, after all these years? Rebecca wiped her eyes, taking a deep, shuddering breath. There was more. There had to be more. She searched through the desk drawers, pulling out old letters, photographs, anything that might hold a clue. One photo caught her attention. It was of her mother, standing beside a much younger Evelyn, their expressions serious, almost somber. Behind them was the old house by the lake, the one Michael had mentioned. On the back, in her mother's handwriting, was a single word, threshold. Rebecca's heart skipped a beat. The lake house. That was where it had all started, where her mother and Evelyn had been involved in something. Something secret, something dangerous. And now, it seemed, it was her turn to face whatever lay beyond that threshold. Rebecca left the house in a daze, the notebook clutched tightly in her hand. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of it terrified her. She had spent her entire life running from the shadows of her past, and now she was about to step into them. Back at the mansion, she put the girls to bed, her heart aching as she kissed them goodnight. She watched them sleep for a long time, memorizing the peaceful rise and fall of their breaths. The way their faces looked so innocent, so untroubled. She wanted to protect them from all of this, to keep them safe from the darkness that seemed to be closing in around them. But she couldn't keep running. She had to face this, for their sake. The next morning, Rebecca packed a small bag and drove out to the lake house, her mind racing with 1,000 possibilities. What would she find there? More secrets? More lies? Or the truth she had been searching for? The house was isolated, surrounded by dense woods, the lake just visible through the trees. It looked abandoned, the windows dark, the paint peeling. But as she approached, Rebecca felt a strange sense of anticipation, as if something were waiting for her inside. She pushed open the creaking door, her footsteps echoing through the empty rooms. The air was cold, the shadows deep. Rebecca moved cautiously, her eyes scanning the dusty furniture, the cobweb-covered corners. There was a feeling here, something heavy and oppressive, like the house itself was holding its breath. In the back of the house, she found a door that led down to the basement. The stairs were steep, the darkness below thick and unwelcoming. Rebecca hesitated, then took a deep breath and started down. The basement was damp and cold, the air filled with the scent of mildew and something else, something metallic. Rebecca's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and she saw, in the far corner, a small wooden box. Her heart pounded as she approached it, her hands shaking as she lifted the lid. Inside was a pendant, identical to the one Evelyn had shown the girls. Beneath it was a stack of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. Rebecca picked them up, her breath catching as she recognized her mother's handwriting. For Rebecca, when you're ready. She sat down on the cold floor, the letters trembling in her hands. She opened the first one, her mother's words filling the page. My dearest Rebecca, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've discovered the truth. Our family's gift is a blessing, but it's also a burden. There are forces in this world that want to use it, to twist it. I tried to protect you from them, but I couldn't do it alone. That's why I asked Evelyn to watch over you. She's not your enemy, Rebecca. She's your guardian. Tears blurred Rebecca's vision as she read. Her mother had known, all those years ago, that this day would come, that Rebecca would have to face the darkness herself. The lake house is a threshold, a place where the veil between worlds is thin. Our family's gift comes from that place, but so does something else, something dangerous. You have to be strong, Rebecca. You have to protect the twins. They're more powerful than you realize, and there are those who will stop at nothing to control them. Rebecca's hands shook as she reached the end of the letter. Her mother had known. She had known everything, and she had trusted Evelyn to protect them. But now Evelyn was gone, and Rebecca was alone. She took a deep, shuddering breath, folding the letter carefully. She would have to be strong, not just for herself, but for her daughters. Whatever was coming, whatever darkness lay beyond the threshold, she would face it. Because she was a Keller, and she would not let her family be taken. Rebecca's resolve hardened as she left the lake house, her mother's letters safely tucked away in her bag. Every word she had read still echoed in her mind. Protect the twins. Be strong. The threshold. Whatever was coming, she knew she had to be ready. She couldn't let her daughters face the darkness alone. She spent the next few days researching, piecing together the fragments of information from her mother's journals and letters. The concept of a threshold was mentioned repeatedly, often in vague, almost mythical terms. It was a place where the boundaries between worlds blurred, where her family's gift originated. But it was also a gateway to something darker, something her mother had spent her life trying to keep at bay. Rebecca's mind raced with questions. How had she lived her whole life without knowing any of this? Why had her mother kept it from her? And most importantly, why had Evelyn returned now, after all these years? The answers, she knew, lay at the threshold. But she was terrified. She had spent her life building walls around herself, constructing a reality that was neat, orderly, and under her control. Now, those walls were crumbling, revealing a world she didn't understand. a world that threatened everything she held dear. One evening, after putting the twins to bed, Rebecca sat alone in the living room, staring at the pendant she had taken from the lake house. It was identical to the one Evelyn had shown the girls, shimmering faintly in the dim light. She could feel a strange energy radiating from it, a pulsing warmth that seemed to resonate with something deep inside her. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. She frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly midnight. Who could be visiting at this hour? She stood, her heart pounding, and opened the door cautiously. Her breath caught in her throat as she saw Evelyn standing on the doorstep, her face shadowed in the dim porch light. "Rebecca," Evelyn said quietly, her voice steady but urgent. "I know I'm not welcome here, but we need to talk." Rebecca's first instinct was to slam the door in her face, but something in Evelyn's eyes stopped her. She stepped back, her hand tightening on the doorknob. "What do you want?" "I'm here to help," Evelyn said, taking a cautious step forward. "I know you don't trust me, but I promise you, everything I've done has been to protect you and the girls. There's something coming, something I've been trying to prepare them for." Rebecca's anger flared. "Prepare them? You've been lying to them, filling their heads with God knows what. You had no right." Evelyn's expression softened, but her eyes remained intense. "I understand why you're angry, but your daughters are more powerful than you realize. They need to be ready, or they'll be vulnerable to what's coming." Rebecca shook her head, her voice trembling. "What's coming? What are you talking about?" Evelyn hesitated, then reached into her coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound book. She held it out to Rebecca, her hand steady. "Your mother left this for you. It's the last piece of the puzzle, the final part of what you need to know." Rebecca took the book reluctantly, her fingers brushing against Evelyn's. The contact sent a jolt of something. Fear, anger, maybe both, through her, but she forced herself to stay calm. "Why now, Evelyn? Why are you telling me this now?" "Because the threshold is opening," Evelyn said softly. "And once it's open, there's no going back. You have to decide, Rebecca. You have to choose to protect them, or to let them face this alone." Rebecca's heart pounded in her chest. She looked down at the book, its cover worn and cracked with age. She didn't want to trust Evelyn, didn't want to believe anything she said, but she couldn't deny the truth of her own fear, the certainty that something terrible was about to happen. "Come inside," she said finally, stepping back to let Evelyn enter. "We need to talk." They sat in the kitchen, the house eerily quiet around them. Evelyn explained everything. How the women in Rebecca's family had been guardians of the threshold for generations, how their gift allowed them to protect the world from what lay beyond. Rebecca listened, her mind reeling as the pieces fell into place. "Your mother tried to shield you," Evelyn said quietly, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea she hadn't touched. "She thought she could protect you by keeping you away from all this. But the gift doesn't disappear, Rebecca. It's in you, and it's in your daughters. You can't hide from it forever." Rebecca shook her head, her voice trembling. "But what is this gift? What are you talking about?" Evelyn sighed, her eyes dark with memories. "It's an ability to sense and influence the energy that flows between worlds, to protect the balance. But it's more than that. It's a responsibility, a duty that's been passed down through your family for centuries. When your mother died, that duty fell to you." "But I don't know how to do any of this," Rebecca said, her voice breaking. "I'm not strong enough. I don't even understand what it means." "You are strong enough," Evelyn insisted, her voice firm. "You've always been strong, Rebecca, but you've been afraid. Afraid of what you might be, of what you might find if you look too deeply. But now, you have to face it. For your daughter's sake, you have to face it." Rebecca's throat tightened, her mind flashing back to the letters, to her mother's words, "Be strong. Protect them." She looked down at the book in her hands, the weight of it heavy, almost suffocating. She knew, deep down, that Evelyn was right. She couldn't keep running. She had to face whatever was coming, even if it terrified her. "What do I need to do?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Evelyn leaned forward, her eyes intense. "We need to go to the lake house. That's where the threshold will open. You'll have to use the gift to connect with the energy there and close it before anything comes through." Rebecca's heart pounded. And if I can't? Then the darkness that's been waiting will break through, Evelyn said softly, and it will consume everything. A cold shiver ran down Rebecca's spine, but she nodded, determination hardening inside her. We'll leave in the morning. The drive to the lake house was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Rebecca could feel the tension building inside her, a knot of fear and resolve that tightened with every mile. The twins sat quietly in the back seat, their eyes wide and watchful, as if they sensed that something was about to change forever. When they arrived, the house seemed to loom over them, its dark windows like empty eyes. Rebecca took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was cold, the shadows deep, but she could feel something else, a presence that seemed to pulse beneath the surface of the walls. Evelyn moved quickly, lighting candles around the room, murmuring words in a language Rebecca didn't recognize. The air seemed to thicken, the shadows growing darker, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The threshold is opening, Evelyn said, her voice tight with urgency. We don't have much time. Rebecca turned to the twins, who stood close together, their faces pale and frightened. She knelt down, pulling them into a tight embrace, her heart breaking at the fear in their eyes. I need you to be brave, she whispered. I'm going to protect you. No matter what happens, I won't let anything hurt you. They nodded, their small hands clutching at her sleeves, their trust breaking her heart. She stood, taking a deep breath, and turned to Evelyn. What do I do? Evelyn handed her the pendant, its surface cool and smooth against Rebecca's skin. You need to use the gift to connect with the energy here and close the threshold. Focus on the love you have for your daughters, on your desire to protect them. That's where your strength comes from. Rebecca nodded, her heart pounding. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, the air growing colder, the shadows deepening. She closed her eyes, gripping the pendant tightly, and reached out with her mind, searching for the pulse of energy Evelyn had spoken of. At first, there was nothing, just darkness and fear. But then, slowly, she felt it, a faint, pulsing warmth, like a heartbeat in the darkness. She focused on it, letting it fill her, feeling it connect with something deep inside her. The air around her seemed to ripple, the shadows twisting and writhing as the energy built, growing stronger and stronger. Rebecca's heart pounded, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps, but she forced herself to stay calm, to hold on to the connection. And then, suddenly, the darkness broke. A surge of energy exploded from Rebecca, a blinding light that filled the room, pushing back the shadows, driving the cold away. She felt a rush of power, of strength, flowing through her, connecting her to something vast and ancient and terrifying. But then, she felt it, a presence, dark and malevolent, pushing back against her, trying to break through. It was like nothing she had ever felt before, a force of pure hatred and rage that seemed to tear at her very soul. She staggered, the light around her flickering, dimming. The darkness surged forward, a wave of shadow that seemed to reach for her, to pull her under. She could feel its cold touch, the whisper of its voice in her mind, promising pain, destruction, death. But then she heard them, the voices of her daughters, calling her name, their small hands gripping her tightly. She felt their love, their trust, their belief in her, and it filled her with a strength she had never known. With a cry, she pushed back, the light around her blazing brighter, stronger. The darkness recoiled, shuddering, but it didn't retreat. It hung there, just beyond the threshold, waiting, watching. You can't have them, Rebecca whispered, her voice trembling with fury and fear. You can't have my daughters. She felt the energy inside her pulse, a surge of power that seemed to come from somewhere deep within her soul. She focused on it, letting it build, feeling it flow through her, into the pendant, into the room, into the very walls of the house. The shadows twisted, writhed, the darkness screaming as the light drove it back, sealing the threshold, closing the gateway. Rebecca felt it resisting, felt it tearing at her mind, but she held on, pouring every ounce of her strength, her love, her determination into the light. And then, with a final, blinding flash. The darkness shattered, the air ringing with a deafening silence. Rebecca fell to her knees, gasping for breath, the room spinning around her. She felt Evelyn's hands on her shoulders, steadying her, but she could barely see, barely think. "It's done," Evelyn whispered, her voice trembling. "You did it, Rebecca. You closed the threshold." Rebecca's vision cleared slowly, the room coming back into focus. The twins were there, their faces pale but unhurt, their eyes wide with shock and fear. She pulled them into her arms, holding them tightly, her heart pounding with relief. "It's over," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You're safe. You're both safe." The twins clung to her, their small bodies trembling, but Rebecca held them tightly, feeling their warmth, their life, their love. She had done it. She had protected them. She had faced the darkness and won. Evelyn stood back, watching Rebecca with a mixture of relief and sadness. "You were stronger than I ever imagined," she said softly. "Your mother would be so proud." Rebecca looked up at her, her heart still racing. "What happens now?" "Now, you live your life," Evelyn said gently. "The threshold is closed, but the gift is still there. You'll need to guide the girls, help them understand it, control it. But you've proven you can do that. You're their mother. You're the guardian now." Rebecca nodded, her heart still pounding, but a sense of calm slowly settling over her. She had faced the shadows of her past, confronted the darkness within herself, and emerged stronger. Whatever lay ahead, she knew she could handle it. Evelyn smiled, a bittersweet expression that tugged at Rebecca's heart. "I'll be leaving now. You don't need me anymore." "Evelyn," Rebecca said, her voice breaking, "I'm sorry. For everything." Evelyn shook her head. "There's nothing to be sorry for. You did what you had to do. And now, it's time for you to move forward." Rebecca nodded, tears filling her eyes. "Thank you. For everything." Evelyn smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Take care of them, Rebecca. They're special. And so are you." With that, she turned and walked away, her figure fading into the shadows, leaving Rebecca alone with her daughters, the house silent around them. That night, as she watched the twins sleep, Rebecca felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The darkness was still there, a shadow on the edge of her mind, but it no longer held the same power over her. She had faced it, understood it, and come out the other side. She would protect her daughters, guide them, help them understand who they were and what they could do. She would be the guardian they needed, the mother they deserved. And whatever lay beyond the threshold, she knew she was ready. We hope you were moved and inspired by our story. We want to hear your opinion. Leave a comment below, share your impressions, and your own stories of resilience and hope. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next emotional videos. Join us on this journey and follow more incredible stories. See you next time.